So we thought in that spirit we would answer a few questions, just to make sure that the questions that are coming in, we would answer. So last night I had the privilege to meet with our great scientists, and they're going to answer some questions for you after our keynote speaker today, this morning, who I had the privilege to go meet with last, everything's a blur for me, but a couple weeks ago. I was in Florida and met with Dr. Shalesh Kaushal, and this is a guy who has his degrees from Johns Hopkins, Harvard, Yale, MIT. I mean, this guy is got the resume that is beyond, and to boot, he has one of the most warm, gregarious personalities too, which was really quite a pleasant bonus of working with this gentleman. He's deeply into genomics. He's into the natural ingredients. I love the way he speaks to his patients. He just does it the right way. We spent about 3.5, 4 hours just sitting at the same table, just going back and forth, and I was listening to his vision of health and wellness and how he talks to his patients, and I realized not just his bio, but his heart, the way he shows up. He's the perfect chief scientific officer for Uforia Science. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Dr. Shalesh Kaushal.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. So this is a very different experience for me. I'm a clinician scientist, as Ron was pointing out, an MD, PhD person. Some of you I had the wonderful opportunity and blessing to meet in Dallas. I'm a retina specialist, and I'm also a biochemist. My special area of interest is in nutritional biochemistry. That actually started, some of you heard, but for those of you, there's a large number who may not know how I got interested in this area, and genomics as well. I'll weave that in just a moment. And then I want to talk specifically about 3 or 4 different important points for all of you to remember from today, okay? In my own lab, I was head of retina at University of Florida for many years, and we were trying to identify new drugs or nutraceuticals for macular degeneration, diabetes, and heart disease. It turns out those diseases, these chronic diseases of age, right? We can start listing them. Those include Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. By the way, the earliest changes in Alzheimer's disease before changes in cognition, right, occur in the retina. So we can see those things as retina specialists. So Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, macular degeneration, glaucoma. Glaucoma is now being called type 4 diabetes. Alzheimer's disease is called type 3 diabetes. You heard about sugar, but I'm going to come back to that in a moment, and sugar metabolism, and why nutraceutical approaches are very powerful and largely perhaps under-recognized and underappreciated, both in clinical medicine and in research as well. So as we were identifying these new compounds, you can buy literally libraries of compounds from various companies throughout the US, elsewhere in the world, and our own National Institutes of Health provide for research scientists a library of almost 250,000 compounds that was curated by Dr. James Duke, not of Duke University, but a brilliant biochemist, medicinal biochemist, who went all over the planet to finding plants and herbs and isolating their active components. In fact, most of the drugs that we use, they come from natural sources, right? But the catch is, the way the pharmaceutical companies do this, I shouldn't say catch, but the way they survive is they take those natural products and modify them, right? They chemically modify them so that they can patent them and then protect that product, right? Now, so in the course of these discoveries, we ran across these nutraceuticals, which I was very suspicious of myself. This is about 7 to 8 years ago. No, actually more, close to 10 years. And so I started reading about them, and I go, oh my gosh, there is this rich understanding outside of my own area of vision biochemistry of these compounds and how they behave in the body in both experimental systems in the lab, also in clinical research. That beginnings of that understanding 10 years ago led to a deeper understanding and an opportunity to interact and collaborate with amazing scientists throughout the US. And it also led simultaneously, because of my long-standing interest in genomics, to trying to couple these two. In other words, how do you take our biochemical individuality? That's a term, that's not my term. A brilliant scientist at Texas A&M, I mentioned this in Dallas, Roger Williams, coined this term long before we really understood SNPs and genomic individuality. He talked about biochemical individuality of all of us. And that understanding laid the foundations as DNA was being discovered. In other words, exactly what the structure of DNA is and the structure of genes. That was simultaneously occurring with our biochemical understanding of not only nutrition, but overall cell health in all of us, right? And that's what we're all striving for in some sense. So in any case, we identified these compounds, right? And we started studying them very intensively. And you've heard about some of them already. You've heard about AC11. And here's a couple take-home points that I hope you might remember from, even if you don't remember everything else I say. And that's these couple, 3-4 points. First, see, in nature designs and our body designs to have compounds produced, and they don't work in isolation. A pharmaceutical agent typically works in isolation, right? Versus a natural compound, it's recruiting multiple cellular processes, another way to say the cell pathways, but it works in conjunction with, right? So in other words, like for example, if you eat broccoli, right? Broccoli is loaded with a compound called sulforaphane, which is profoundly protective of the retina, brain, and heart. It's one of the most potent antioxidants we know. But you don't just eat sulforaphane, you're also eating the B complex of vitamins that's found in broccoli, right? And also, there's a whole slew of other compounds. We could talk about that all day long. But that's the way nature designed it. And the idea, right, of this pre-trition that some of you have already heard of, right, is to recreate that, right? These are natural compounds, and they're working synergistically. That means they're working together. Now, what does that mean? Like, for example, in this room, right, we all feel pretty comfortable, but there's a thermostat there, and it's a rheostat, so you can tweak it a couple degrees this way or that way to get comfortable in this room, right? Same way in our bodies, if our cells are not in balance, right, they're sort of out of tilt, we're not optimal. We sense it, we notice it by our mood and so on. And so the idea is to recreate a sense of balance. Now, that's not only a psychological state, but that's a true biochemical state. We know this. That's another fun topic we can talk about for 5-6 hours alone, the biochemistry of cell stress and cell balance. But what I want you to remember is that ability to create balance, right, is what the idea of foundational nutrition is. So-called pre-trition, right? I shouldn't say so-called, but for Uforia, it's an interesting coining of the name pre-trition. What does that mean? And is that different from what the company is all about, this concept of biochemical individuality or genomic individuality? And the answer is no. So here's the way to think about it, or the way to frame it in your own mind, and or to explain it to other people. See, all of us, there's wonderful studies in the US and elsewhere in the world. There's about 40 to 41 essential vitamins and minerals that we all require to function as human beings. 80% of Americans are deficient in a set of that. Just think about that for a moment. All of us sitting here, right? As much as we may be interested in our own health and nutrition, we are biochemically imbalanced, right? That's no pun, right? But what I'm getting at is, so we're deficient in these vitamins and minerals. And so we have to replete our bodies with those before you can actually deal with our individuality, our genomic individuality, right? So the idea is if you have a bucket that's half full or 1/4 full, you have to fill it up first, right? Before you have the opportunity in our bodies to then address those issues of our genetic changes, right? So the idea of the pre-nutrition or foundational nutrition that's the way I explain it to my own patients. In fact, we give them handouts of this. Here's a set of foundational nutritional recommendations based on international studies and peer-reviewed literature that we want you to take. And that's the way you can explain it to your colleagues, friends, or potential folks who are interested in getting the Uforia products, is we first have to create some degree of balance, right, in our bodies, and the pre-nutrition, the foundational nutrition is doing that. That's point one. Second, let's now come back to this concept of what it is that is what these SNPs represent. So the way to think about it and to explain it to people is it's a genetic weakness, right? Now, that genetic weakness doesn't mean you're going to get a disease. Now, obviously, we don't want to talk about disease, but I, as a physician, talk to patients about it in the context of disease. A genetic weakness, or a SNP change, implies that what's happened in our bodies is that there's the possibility of developing, in conjunction with other SNPs, of developing a disease. But here's the good news. 70% of our genes in our body are nutritionally responsive. In other words, we can overwhelm what we were born with by using appropriate, intelligent, precision-guided, right? And that's not an hyperbole anymore, right? I mean, we really, literally can do this. Genomic and biochemical testing. Now, we're focused on the genomic piece right now, right? The SNPs. So the idea is that suppose somebody has a genetic weakness, a certain set of SNPs, that can be overcome with appropriate nutritional supplementation. That's the way to think about it, or the way to frame it. And that's the way to potentially explain it to your colleagues, friends, and so on who may be interested in the Uforia products. Now, I'm summarizing huge bodies of literature, and we could keep talking for the rest of the day, but I know it's really about this and that, and we have to, I'm also learning from all of you as well, the other aspects of what goes on here. But those have been two critical points I've made. Now, the other point I'd make to you is we're sitting on a precipice. In other words, this is an unusual time where the confluence of basic research and its clinical application are coming together. And it is true both in the research environment, right, in academia, as well as in entrepreneurial activities like Uforia. And I believe, and I mean it sincerely, I think this clearly represents, I shouldn't say I think, it is a unique opportunity. And that's why I got involved with it. I mean, Mike reached out to me some months ago and asked me if I was interested in participating. And I said, yeah, I believe this is an unusual opportunity to be at the leading edge, not the bleeding edge, but at the leading edge of this type of technology that has the opportunity to profoundly impact human health, right? And the goal is, and this is another, hopefully a takeaway for all of you to appreciate, the goal is not necessarily to get rid of a doctor, right? Because some people have it in their head, geez, if I can just improve my nutrition, I don't need to go see my physician. I literally had a patient like this yesterday, right? And what it is we want to, the way to think about Uforia is that we're optimizing each person's individual biochemistry, right? So we do the genetic testing, right? So genes make proteins, and it's proteins that carry out the functions of our body, right? So the genes are essentially, you can think of it as the instruction book, the recipe book of making proteins. Now, I've simplified it. There's all sorts of, as you might imagine, nuance and subtlety to it. But I think in a larger sense, we know that this is to be true. In fact, multiple Nobel Prizes have been given for this work. But the idea again is we are trying to help people optimize their health. And what that really means from a biochemical point of view is to optimize how each cell in our body works. And that is nutritionally controllable. Indeed, these chronic disorders that I started to list, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, macular degeneration, glaucoma, high blood pressure, coronary artery disease, diabetes, obesity, age-related muscle loss, osteoarthritis, age-related bone marrow dysfunction. They're all related to each other, and they're all nutritionally mitigated. Let me give you at least one or multiple examples that hopefully you might be able to remember, and that would be useful in sharing with your colleagues. One of my very good friends, Dale Bredesen at UCLA, has now published a series of papers demonstrating for the first time the reversal of Alzheimer's disease. No pharmaceutical agents involved, and he's unaware of Uforia at the moment. But he used SNP testing, right, coupled with thoughtful nutraceuticals and other biochemical testing to help these patients. That's one example. Another colleague of mine, Mark Houston, up in Vanderbilt, at the Hypertension Institute, has demonstrated using nutraceutical approaches in combination with SNP testing, right, genetic testing, to treat patients with hypertension and coronary artery disease. In our own instance, we are having some wonderful results in patients with macular degeneration and glaucoma and diabetic retinopathy using a similar approach as well. So we're sitting on this amazing opportunity, both in terms of us as healthcare providers and physicians, of profoundly impacting patients' health on one side, and also simultaneously mitigating the effect of disease. Now we use the word mitigate, right? We're not getting rid of the disease per se. Hopefully, as we continue to understand not only our understanding, but our clinical implementation of that understanding deepens, we can frankly reverse these diseases. So I've given you at least 3-4 points, a framework to think about these. Let me just talk to you about a couple of ingredients, and I need to find out how much time I have. Where's Craig? Okay, I don't see Craig, so I'll keep going. I hope you don't mind. I hope this is useful for all of you. Yeah, I'm not used to people clapping and making scientific or clinical meetings. I mean, we get up there and very serious faces in the audience, right? Especially early on in my career, I was always the people that I admired, they would be in the audience, and I would rehearse my talks, by the way, in front of a mirror, literally, because I wanted to make sure I was appropriate. Oh, there we go. Okay, wonderful, 5 minutes. I could state it correctly, right? And so, people don't usually give a round of applause. In fact, it's often the opposite. They didn't throw tomatoes, but by the way, I have to tell you, I've met a set of you. It's very refreshing to meet people who are so motivated and so broad-minded. It's actually a lot of fun for me. I know some of you may not appreciate all the science, but the goal is to help you understand it, or at the minimum, have a way to think about it, to not only appreciate and deepen your own understanding and improve your own health, right? Because in some sense, that's going to be a testimony for yourself and for Uforia, if you think about it, right? But also to be able to explain it to other people. So let me just talk to you about a couple of ingredients, right? One of them in nutrition is goji berry extract. Now that turns out to be very interesting, and when Mike told me about this, actually a couple of years ago, that really turned me on. I'll tell you why. In my own lab, we demonstrated some years ago that goji berries profoundly stimulate stem cells. Okay, and we didn't publish that on purpose because we wanted to develop a company. Well, so here's Uforia. they beat us to it. But we showed that it has a very profound effect on stem cells, and it's a potent anti-inflammatory agent as well. One can only imagine that in pre-nutrition, coupled with AC11, it has a wonderful synergistic effect. I'll tell you just an interesting sidebar also about, each of these has its own fascinating story around it. It turns out that if you look into Tibetan literature, Tibetan monks nearly every day have the soup of goji berries as part of their diet. And you know what they call it? They call it the elixir of life. Well, in a way that makes very good sense, right? If you're stimulating your stem cells through goji berry, actually the active ingredient goji berry, right? That does make you feel good, right? In all of us, right? So that's one ingredient that I thought I'd share that with you. It's one of the most potent antioxidants we know of. The second ingredient, some of you may have heard of, is astaxanthin. Astaxanthin is one of the most potent amphipathic antioxidants. Let me tell you what that means. You don't really need to remember the word. So antioxidants can exert their effect, their protective effect, within the cell, right? Inside the cell, which is predominantly water. It's about 70% water. But astaxanthin is interesting. Not only does it work within the cell, within that watery milieu, but it also works at the cell membrane. The cell membrane is where all our lipids are, or the bulk of our lipids, I shouldn't say all our lipids. And our lipids are human beings, our lipids are unusually prone to oxidative damage, right? And this is another fun conversation, how lipids get oxidized and injured, and that leads to cell death, right? And then subsequently to tissue dysfunction, and then eventually disease. This has been demonstrated not only in the retina, in the brain, in the heart, and so on. So astaxanthin is protective in both those areas, both within the cell and at the cell surface where these lipids are, these fats, right? A third ingredient is alpha-lipoic acid. I believe that some of you who were in Dallas may have heard me say it when I talk about this. This is another amazing natural compound. It's found in our bodies, by the way, but it declines with age and it declines with the development of chronic diseases. There's wonderful studies from Mayo Clinic and many other places demonstrating that alpha-lipoic acid is very good for diabetics. Now, I know all of us here, I as a physician can say that to my patients. You can't say that yourselves in the context of Uforia, and you shouldn't, right? But what you can say is that it improves nerve function. Here's what I mean by this. What these Mayo Clinic studies and others showed is that alpha-lipoic acid in patients with diabetic neuropathy, right? They have tingling in their feet and so on. It is profoundly protective of that. In addition, alpha-lipoic acid has the ability to bind heavy metals in our body, right? So as many of you know, we are exposed to heavy metals because of surface mining in the United States. Actually, I should say the US, only worldwide. And we collect these heavy metals like cadmium and so on. And again, this is another interesting conversation to have. So it binds that and you literally pee it out, right? In addition, alpha-lipoic acid improves energy production. There are energy factories in our cell. They're called mitochondria. Dr. Bruce Ames demonstrated some years ago. He's a brilliant biochemist out at UC Berkeley. He and others have shown that it improves the functioning of these energy factories and it increases numbers of those. Now that turns out to be incredibly important, not only for health, right, but also all sorts of diseases. Nearly every disease you can think of, these energy factories are dysfunctional. Now again, you can't use, as part of the Uforia, you can't use the words to treat a disease, but what you can say is it can improve energy production in the body, right? So that's not really disease associated, although anyone who understands this field or appreciates chronic diseases will immediately understand, geez, that's addressing one of the fundamental issues that's occurring in chronic diseases. Thank you, Craig. So those are, well, it's only 1 minute. So those are at least a couple examples of compounds that are in nutrition, as well as some that can will be part of the personalized nutritional package for each patient. I guess we can't use the word patient, but for each client who decides to get the Uforia testing done and so on. So I hope I've given you in the last 15-20 minutes. It's always interesting to try to summarize 50-60 years worth of research in 20 minutes. But hopefully you have at least, at a minimum, a framework to think about nutrition, some of the products, or some of the components, the nutraceuticals, I should say. I never really liked that word product. I mean, these are nutraceuticals. They're found in nature. They're incredibly good for us as human beings. How these work synergistically together. I didn't talk in detail about that, but any of you would like to chat about that, that's really what my own research lab has worked on for many years. And also the way to think about genetic weaknesses, these so-called SNPs, right? And before you can really treat a SNP, you have to fill up your buckets, right? And that's the whole idea of foundational nutrition. And hopefully I also give you a sense of a perspective of where this field's come in the last 40 to 50 years. And I believe we truly are at a precipice. Now, the last parting thought I'd share with you is this is, as you know, science and medicine are constantly evolving, right? So we're on version 1, right? Mike and I have spoken, and other folks connected with Uforia and so on. We talk about, what does version 2 look like, and version 3, version 4? Because as science continues to progress, the company itself will continue to progress because we'll have the opportunity to take that new understanding that's gleaned in, let's say, 2019, or just most recently in 2018, and bring that to bear in the next generation of products. So it's not something like making a widget, right? You make a widget, it's the same widget, and of course you want incredibly high quality control for your widget, but it's the same widget, whether you bought it 50 years ago or today, right? It's the same widget, right? Or screw, or whatever the case may be. In a biotechnology company like this, it's constantly evolving, and that's very exciting from the perspective of a clinician scientist. But I believe it should be very exciting for all of you because it's a constant journey, right? We're all learning, we're all evolving, and we're evolving together. So I hope you might remember that as well, that this is very different than a company that's selling, whatever, as I said, widget or shampoo. Nothing against those companies, we need them, right? But a biotech company is fundamentally different in this way. There's no such thing as an absolute truth. We're evolving to it. And we grow together in our understanding and in also how we implement, how we impact patient health and nutrition. And that is really the last point that I've made, is what really turns me on. I intensely enjoy, I love my family first, but I intensely enjoy taking care of patients in science. And this is something that has a chance, this isn't meant as hyperbole or exaggeration. It really has a chance to impact a tremendous number of people. And why is that important? In the United States alone, the number of patients with these chronic disorders that's debilitating, right, to not only to each individual, but it also affects our society and our economy profoundly, right? If we can it's rising exponentially. It's going out through the roof. In my own field as a retina specialist, there's a shortage of us throughout the world. And the reality is there's a shortage of every kind of doctor that you can imagine because of the rise of these chronic disorders. If we can improve patients' health and nutrition, we can at least begin to mitigate the effects and the eventual, hopefully, the development of these chronic disorders. All right, thank you so much.